A wild celebration had broken out on the streets of Melbourne town, at least as wild as was permissible within Victorian-era standards of morality. The day, one which Melburnians had been waiting for 10 years, had arrived. The cause of the celebration was the news that royal assent had been given to the Australian Constitutions Act of 1850, which had the consequence of separating Melbourne and the surrounding areas, then known as the Port Phillip District, from New South Wales, creating the second Australian colony, Victoria. For years, the paltry representation offered in the New South Wales Parliament had been serially outvoted and ignored, leading to funding for public works often having difficulty finding its way south. There was a 4-day holiday announced immediately after the news, culminating in the opening of the Princes Bridge, which crosses the Yarra next to where Flinders Street Station now stands. Similar celebrations were held on the 1st of July 1851, when the Act took effect and Victoria came into being. The 1st of July, until the First World War, would become a public holiday in Victoria, known as Separation Day or Victoria Day. At the first Separation Day celebration in 1851, though merriment was had at the occasioning of the long-awaited separation from New South Wales, a spectre loomed over the festivities. At these celebrations were many native-born Australians of European descent, but there were also many British migrants, who would come to Australia in the first half of the 19th century based on promises of an idyllic utopia. Caroline Chisholm, a philanthropist and great supporter of colonial migration to Australia, wrote that she knew from personal observation the vast resources which Australia offers, the comfort, the abundance the people in these colonies enjoy. It has been suggested that this bountiful version of the Antipodes is likely to have contributed to the idea of portable domesticity, whereby migrants engaged in the wholesale transfer of English life to the colonies. For a time, the Australian environment was relatively benign, and so this portable domesticity was able to persist. This was until so terrible a lesson was inflicted on the colonists that the memory of February 6, 1851, now known as Black Thursday, would indelibly imprint itself on the Australian collective consciousness. 1851 had started in the typical fashion of an Australian summer, with a searing heat wave, as drought beset the Port Phillip district, from Port Phillip to as far as the Edward River, some 280 kilometres to the north. Any rain was quickly absorbed by the dry ground, and waterholes and creeks dried up. The dryness brought dust so given to billowing that the Melbourne Argus noted, "Instead of walking with your head erect and your eyes acting as a guide to your movements, your chin reclined upon your breast, and with eyes closed, you were compelled to feel your way from one end of the township to the other." At this point in mid-January, reports began to filter into Melbourne of fires in the regions which had been deliberately lit. One explanation offered was that the fires sought to clear land and generate green pick, a young grass enjoyed by livestock, while another suggested improper management of a campfire by some timber splitters caused the blaze. The colonists sought to tame the landscape, applying Northern Hemisphere farming principles with no sensitivity to their environment or the possibility that it might need to be managed in a different way. The widespread deforestation was problematic in that Europeans used fire as the most efficient means of clearing the land, with little understanding of how difficult it can be to control the burning of an arid landscape. These fires persisted for weeks into early February. In town, the disaster unfolding in the countryside was not yet apparent. On Thursday the 6th of February, Melburnians were more occupied with mitigating heat than fire as they toiled through the crescendo of an unrelenting summer, with reports of temperatures as high as 48 degrees, which, if accurate, would still be the hottest recorded temperature in Melbourne's history, beating out temperatures from the Black Summer and Black Saturday bushfires. William Westgarth, who would go on to be a member of the Legislative Council of Victoria's first Parliament, recalls how the news of encircling inferno first broke in Melbourne. Dr. Alexander Thompson, then Mayor of Geelong, had galloped breathlessly from Geelong to Melbourne, where he selflessly informed some mill owners of the damage to grain crops caused by the fires, which led to an immediate rise in the price of flour by 30%. Westgarth commented, "The doctor had certainly earned a good fee on that occasion, and we must hope that he got it." Word then gradually spread of the fires, and was evidenced by the encroaching cloud of dust which gradually blanketed Melbourne. Many Australians will recall news stories or perhaps personal experiences during the Black Summer bushfires of the sky turning shades of orange and red. On Black Thursday, even in northern Tasmania and far eastern Gippsland, the sky was black, and everything was enveloped in smoke with falling ash and burning debris. It appeared that the whole of the colony of Victoria was on fire. Melbourne passed through the ordeal with few actual encounters with the fires, however, as surrounding grasses thinned by livestock and well-spaced trees gave little opportunity for the fire to propagate itself. Outside the capital, squatters and their herds were not as lucky. The women and children fled from their blazing huts. The shepherds left their flocks to perish, unable to drive them to any conceivable place of refuge. Drovers conducting mobs of cattle and horses were compelled to leave them to shift for themselves, and fled away at the highest speed of their horses for their own lives. Bizarre tales of human survival were recorded, such as the escape of a bullock driver who had become encircled by the flames on Mount Macedon, and found a path out by holding onto the tail of a bull and being pulled to safety by it. So too were recorded stories of thoughtless malice, as in the case of the Geelong fire front, where two men had lit fires with the supposed goal of driving a squatter off a piece of land. This blaze would go on to kill 5 people. The loss of human life was minimal, with only 12 recorded deaths, though more may have gone unreported. The number of animal deaths, however, was unquantifiable. At least 1 million sheep and tens of thousands of cattle, it is estimated, died during the blazes. We have no way of knowing the exact number of native animals that perished, but given that the Black Summer bushfires, which covered an area 5 times the size of Black Thursday, resulted in the deaths of an estimated 3 billion animals, it's possible that in the relatively fertile and unexplored areas affected by Black Thursday, the number of native animal deaths would be in the hundreds of millions, perhaps even billions. Property damage too was immense. Thousands of homes were lost and myriad crops were razed. This led many settlers to financial ruin. There was no insurance. Many squatters with smaller holdings were forced to abandon their runs and sell off their remaining goods and animals. In the mother country, reports of black desolation, as though the area had been swept by the wing of the destroying angel, came by ship, putting paid to the idea promoted by emigration advertising material that one could seamlessly begin life afresh in an Antipodean Eden. The scales of the fires are difficult to comprehend. There were 2 fire fronts in northwestern Victoria, in the Wimmera and Mallee regions, 2 coastal fires in and around the towns of Portland and Warrnambool, and the main fire ground, which encompassed the entire Greater Melbourne area, Geelong and beyond. These fires spread as far east as the western edge of Gippsland, near Ballarat in the west and near Seymour in the north. The difficulty of communication across these distances and the lack of modern firefighting technology means these estimations could be leaving out other fires that went undetected in the sparsely populated countryside. The amount of land burned was at least 5 million hectares, or a quarter of Victoria. The official separation of Victoria from New South Wales was a joyous moment the new state needed desperately. On the 1st of July 1851, the commencement of the largely friendly interstate rivalry between New South Wales and Victoria gave these new Victorians something else to think about, and getting their own legislative council was a welcome change. Still, people had died, been ruined financially, and lost homes and property. Being renamed from the Port Phillip district to Victoria wasn't going to change any of that. What did change the economic fortunes of Victorians, by a bizarre coincidence, was an event that happened on the same day 120 kilometres outside of Melbourne. In Creswick Creek, near the town of Clunes, prospector James Esmond discovered the first notable deposits of native gold. The discovery of this gold would put into motion the series of events that would lead to what we now know as the Victorian Gold Rush, the rapid increase in Victoria's population, and the good economic tidings that brought about the capital's nickname, Marvellous Melbourne. It has been suggested that the curious timing of the discovery may have been deliberate. Historian Catherine Andrews noted that there is a notion that Governor Latrobe knew of the discovery of gold in Victoria and that he did not announce it because he did not want New South Wales to know. Discoveries of gold had been made in the area up to a year earlier, but these were insignificant and unmarketable amounts. It is unclear why, in this hypothesis, Latrobe would have hidden the discovery when the act securing their statehood had already passed a year earlier. New South Wales could hardly have sent word to London in time, much less convince them to reabsorb Victoria into New South Wales because they wanted money from the gold and the economic advantages it would bring. Regardless, the influence of the discovery of gold profoundly changed the economic situations of Victorians for the better. From the ashes of the Port Phillip district rose Victoria, tempered by the experience of Black Thursday and prepared for the challenges ahead.
The herd is getting tired, but we've got no time to rest. I try to clear the red dust that is gathered in my chest. From riding tail on 1,000 head with the weather getting dry, the black cloud in the west is warning, ride, ride, ride. The roaring heat is closer, ice is falling by our side, and every beast and bird is fleeing with its warning cry. We've got to reach the river, but it's still 10 miles or more, and close behind us we can hear that wild inferno